We have left reality and we are now creating our own. When two gay men, one woman, and two more women are needed to make a baby, something has gone drastically wrong. In other news, the Women of the Year is a man, and the winningest female swimmer is also a man. Welcome to Church Public. I'm Matt Odegaard. Welcome to Church Public. I am Matt Odegaard. I will be your host today at Church Public. You can go to churchpublic.com. If you haven't already, like this, subscribe, share it with all of your friends. Share it with one friend. I just want you to understand what is going on in the world so that you can know how to deal with the world from a Christian perspective, from a follower of Jesus perspective. My goal is for you to understand who Jesus is and what it means to follow him in this weird and wacky and crazy world that does not any longer acknowledge reality. That is the place that we're in. So if you haven't already subscribed on all of the podcast places or YouTube or churchpublic.com, go there and subscribe and share it with one person, because I want more people to understand. This isn't about me. It is about Jesus. And I want people to understand how to follow Jesus in this weird and crazy world. So thanks for being part of this community. I really appreciate it. And at this point, we're listener supported. So if you want to donate, I appreciate that too. All right. So today we are talking about some weird and wild things. Today we're talking about a conservative, quote unquote, host of another podcast that is having twins. And that's really where we have to start. So let's take a look. We have Dave Rubin, who is a conservative podcast host and whom I really like and I listen to quite a bit because he has good perspective on quote unquote conservative things. The problem is, in this particular instance, he's having twins with his husband who is married to him. But this situation is going to take literally 5 people. 5. The 2 dads, who are legally married, according to the government, each donated a sperm, and a mom donated 2 of her own eggs, and 2 other moms are donating their bodies for gestation, surrogacy, hence the different birth dates for these twins. If you missed that from the picture is baby number 1, looks like 8/22/22, baby number 2, 10/14/22. So they have different birth dates, and they have different birth dates because they're coming from different moms. But this is so far from not only the biblical model of one man and one woman going forth to multiply, Genesis, go forth, be fruitful and multiply, but it goes against the natural order. What once took a mother and a father to create a family now is taking 5 people and numerous specialty doctors. We have lost the thread of reality. And this is part of the problem. Part of the problem is this is a quote unquote conservative host of a podcast. And the reality is he's really not. And he really might not even acknowledge that he's conservative. He's said for a long time that he's liberal. It's just that the left has gone so far left that even liberals have become more centered and are arguing for things that conservatives are arguing for, like not making sexual education and gender ideology part of school curriculum, like we saw in Florida. This quote unquote don't say gay bill, which by the way, it doesn't say. But not preaching to children transgender and LGBTQAAIP plus ideology to kindergarten through 3rd graders is really controversial, apparently. He happens to be one host who has argued against it. But he also is having twins with his husband, which is not actually possible, which is why it takes 5 people to accomplish having twins. So this is where we're at. We're at this weird place where some conservatives are not actually conservative. Or what we really need to say is conservative does not equal Christian. And we need to watch out for this because I'm seeing this more and more, and I'm seeing it all over the place. I'm seeing it from conservative people all over social media and all over the internet who say conservative things in one sense because they're arguing for things that conservatives argue against, but they also argue for certain liberal things like abortion and same-sex marriage. Those are not conservative values, quote unquote, and they're definitely not biblical values. And that's the problem. We've conflated all of these ideas into one political ball and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't make sense. So I don't know what to call it anymore. I am conservative and I am a Christian, but I'm conservative because I'm a Christian. I have conservative values and I want to promote conservative values because I believe the thing that we are conserving is the very biblical reality that we live in and the very reality of nature that is explained through biblical reality. For instance, you can look at nature and know how God works. That's what the Bible tells us through Genesis, through Romans. Let's read out of Romans. This is Romans 1:18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and righteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they, us, we are without excuse. In other words, creation reveals God, and it is clear if we pay attention to it. In this instance, where we just looked, we know that a man and a woman create a baby. Everyone has known that for the whole existence of time. But now, in this new world order, in this new weird reality that we have created, it takes 5 people to create the same baby, or 2 babies that are related, but not really. This is where we're at as a society. And this is the problem, because we've gone so far from biblical reality. We've gone so far from natural reality. That's why I like the founders so much. And that's why I quote them so much. That's why I even look at the founding documents and say, when it is revealed by nature and nature's God. The founders knew that nature showed truth. We all used to know that nature showed truth. Now we are going so far beyond nature that we have to literally manufacture truth. But creation shows what is true. Creation shows what is real. The created, you and me, we have now gone our own way and we've created something that is not real, that is not reality. And that is the problem, weird as it is, that we find ourselves in. And the problem that I see when we get into the political realm, which we look at current events from a Christian perspective, that's politics. The problem is we have a lot of conservatives who are saying they are conservative, or at least not leftists, but the reality is they're not really conservative from the definition of we want to conserve the things that are traditional because the tradition is based on a foundation, and that foundation is ultimately the Bible. But not all conservatives believe that. And in fact, more and more conservatives do not believe that. We're going to see more of this in a few minutes. But before we get to that, and before we get to where conservatism is going, which is not a great direction, we have to look at more non-reality. We have to see what is going on with the Woman of the Year. Because before we get to Woman of the Year, I want to say this. Here are some things that are kind of disappointing, but also not surprising. And this is in regards to the situation that we saw with Dave Rubin and his twins that are about to be born. And this gets to the conservative perspective. The conservative perspective used to be conservative. Now it is that conservatives are congratulating the Rubins on this. So here we have, sadly, PragerU saying congrats at Rubin Report. Now, I like PragerU. And I like Dave Rubin, and I listen to him, and he's smart, and he calls things out that I believe should be called out. But in this instance, it doesn't make sense. And the fact that PragerU congratulates, that kind of bums me out a little bit, right? And then we have Blaze TV. If you're familiar, Blaze TV is very quote-unquote conservative and leads a lot of conservative-type movements. But in this instance, is congratulating a thing that is just not conservative. And one more for you. This is Megyn Kelly. What? This is amazing news. So happy for you. She responds to the Twitter feed. And I don't even like doing this. I don't like calling people out by name, but we have to talk about these things. And the reason that we have to talk about these things is all of the people that responded that I showed, and there were many more, were ostensibly or clearly conservative, except this is not a conservative issue. It's just not. And I have no ill will for Dave Rubin and his quote-unquote husband and their 2 twin babies that are going to be born on different dates. I hope the children have a good life, but the reality is a child needs a father and a mother. That's not me saying that. Both, it's nature saying that, because we know that even you get into science and psychology, children need fathers and mothers for different things. There's a father, and the father can provide certain things for a child. A mother can provide certain things for a child. Neither can provide everything a child needs by design. Then spiritually, scripturally, that's just what we are given as the template for the family by God in Genesis, by Jesus in the Gospels, by Paul, etc., etc. This is just the reality of the created order, how God created it. We're supposed to follow along with that. But again, we have gone our own way, as Paul writes in Romans. So that brings us to the woman of the year, or at least one of them, which is Rachel Levine. Now, if you don't know, Rachel Levine, and I have a picture here for those that are watching, was named by USA Today as one of the women of the year. Rachel Levine is, I don't know how else to say this, a biological man. So what? I'm speechless. I don't know what to do with that. So the woman of the year, according to USA Today, is Rachel Levine, who is also now an admiral because of the position that I'll just say Rachel holds in the government, who's a doctor, Dr. Levine. And now they are women of the year. And here is part of why. The definition of courage. This USA Today article says, Admiral Rachel Levine, one of USA Today's Women of the Year honorees, is groundbreaking leader who credits family and support for helping. Women of the Year honoree, Admiral Rachel Levine, defines courage. So is it courageous to go against biology? Is it courageous to move into a place where you create your own reality? Let's hear from Dr. Levine. So here is part of the interview. I quoted some of this. I wrote it down in the interview about the courage that it took to become Woman of the Year, ostensibly. Dr. Levine is asked, quote, "What is your definition of courage?" The answer, quote, "I think my definition of courage would be to be true to yourself, be true to who you are, and then to pay that forward to work towards the common good. That's what I have always tried to do." So, end quote. Dr. Levine says, the way to have courage is to be true to who you are. Be true to who you are. I mean, I hate to point this out, but that's like postmodern deconstructive language, like, hey, you be you. And when you're you, then you'll be you. Reminds me of wherever you go, there you are. It's deep. Very, very deep. At any rate, be true to who you are. I think I know what that means. I'm not sure Dr. Levine knows what that means. But fortunately, Dr. Levine expounds on this a little bit. In the interview, Dr. Levine is asked, for transgender or non-conforming or questioning people, again, the LGBTQAAIP, the quote is, "What is your advice to them on their journey?" Dr. Levine said, quote, "I think you have to be true to yourself, and I think that you have to be true to who you are. You have tremendous worth just for who you are, no matter who you love, no matter who you are, no matter what your gender identity, sexual orientation, or anything else. And to be true to that, and then everything will follow." End quote. Now, so we're talking about the T in the LGBT. But here's the problem with that. And I deal a lot with logic, and it's something interesting to me, and I like to think about the logical extension of a statement. If you're true to you and you follow all of the way that you want to be until its end, that doesn't actually go to the place that you think it goes. And in fact, it mostly goes to bad places. This is just true. And we all know this is true. We can pretend it's not true, but we know it's true. I hate to use this example, but the best example are things like addiction. If you're addicted to alcohol and you like alcohol and you extend that to the end result of liking alcohol too much, you're addicted to alcohol, you're an alcoholic, and you make really bad decisions when you're an alcoholic. Now, I'm not necessarily comparing the two, but I didn't make this comparison. I didn't set up this framework. This is the framework that is set up in this interview, that courage equals being true to yourself and following yourself as far as that goes. I didn't create this framework. I'm just trying to figure out where it goes. And the reality is, I'm not even sure Dr. Levine believes this reality, but some people do. Some people do believe this is the reality, that you be you, you be true to yourself, and follow that wherever you go. And some people actually believe this and are going down this road, which is why you have professors at big institutions right now arguing for minor attracted persons to be legitimized. Minor attracted persons. We used to call that pedophilia. Now it's just minor attracted persons, because this is the end result of this ideology. Because there are only two parts to this gender theory that Dr. Levine is saying. The first we've heard for a long time. You're born this way. And you are who you are. This is what Dr. Levine is saying, right? You're born this way. And so you should be you. You should be true to yourself. You should do everything that needs to happen based on who you think you are, whether that's changing your gender or whatever. And then that's the first premise. Number two is that consent is the only guideline. Because again, I'm holding the Bible if you can't see and you're not watching. The Bible used to be our framework. We used to judge ourselves based on external things like the Bible that said you should do certain things and you shouldn't do other things. Paul would say it like, all things are permissible, not all things are beneficial, which is a pretty good statement. And Jesus said it in different ways to follow him, love God, not yourself. Anyway, so you're born this way, and consent is the only guideline. And we have seen that in culture. Rape is bad. Agreed. Me Too movement. We've seen my body, my choice, which I don't agree with, because it's not really your body when it's another body. That's just a logical fallacy. But again, logic. But you see this in that consent is the only guideline. And now we're told children are and should be encouraged to choose their gender and sexual orientation and preference as young as possible. We see this in the, again, quote unquote, don't say gay bill, of which it doesn't say that, but this transgender and this gender ideology that children as young as kindergarten, so what is that, 4 or 5 years old, should be able to choose their gender. So that's giving consent. So these are the rules. You're born this way, and you should be able to consent. So based on their values, children can and should consent to sexuality. So then when we see someone arguing for minor attracted persons, it's not surprising, because these are the values they set up. If someone is born attracted to children, they should pursue that because they were born that way. And children can and should consent to sexual things. This is, by the way, to put it in perspective from a Christian perspective, all wrong and all terrible. But this is the culture we live in, and you need to know that. And I hate even talking about this. I would, again, much rather talk about something else. But we have to understand this is the way the left is thinking. This is the way the left is acting. And even when the left ostensibly argues for certain conservative things, they don't argue for other conservative things. In this twins situation that we just talked about, Rubin argues against some of the LGBT indoctrination in schools, but argues for it in this instance. And the actions, in some instances, as some of us say, the actions speak louder than words. And now we're in the trans ideology, the T in the LGBT. And you have people pushing for permanent gender transition for teenagers and younger who can now consent to whatever gender reality they dream up. This is the way schools, cities, other places, like you have states that are setting up things where, again, I came from California, and I can tell you that when my children went over a certain age, like it was either 12 or 13, I was not allowed to see their medical record without their consent. I'm not making this up. This is real and is really happening. And it happens in cities and counties and states across America, that they believe consent is the only thing that is necessary. And so they have to create this reality where you are forced to live in it and agree with it. And Leah Thomas fits into this. Leah Thomas, the swimmer, I actually just saw right before I started, just tonight, Leah Thomas won another race by almost 2 seconds in the women's 500-yard freestyle. That's swimming. If you don't know anything about swimming, and I know very little about swimming, but I know enough to know that 2 seconds is an eternity. I think the headline said Leah Thomas annihilates competition or something like that. 2 seconds might not seem like a lot for you and me in normal life, but in swimming, it is an eternity. And we are asked to think that Leah Thomas is exactly the same as the other women that are on the team when Leah Thomas is a biological male. And we're just asked to suspend our own reality for the sake of this person because this person wants to live in a different reality than creation. And going back to this conservative issue, the head of CPAC, the largest conservative organization, I believe, in America, Matt Schlapp, said about about Leah that, quote, no matter what one thinks of Leah's ability to swim with women, her story deserves our compassion. It will be interesting to hear Leah's point of view in 30 years, end quote. So did you even hear the thing in there that was interesting? The head of CPAC, the largest conservative organization in America, used female pronouns to talk about Leah Thomas, who is a biological male. That may not sound like a big thing, but it is a big thing. Why is that a big thing? It's a big thing because if you are ostensibly conservative, especially if you're Christian, but as I mentioned before, Christian does not equal conservative, and conservative definitely does not equal Christian. If you are ostensibly conservative, you would think you would argue for conservative values. But the reality now is that conservative values don't mean what they used to mean, and a lot of times don't mean what we think they mean when we talk about them. So you just have to be very careful what you're talking about. And really, as I started with, you have to start with Jesus first. You have to start with the Bible first. You have to start with God first, because it is important to understand politics. It is important to know the current events. That's why I'm doing this. But it's also important to start with God and end with God, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. You can't move into a place of quote unquote conservatism if conservatism is not going in the direction of God. It's not going in the direction of spiritual reality. And we see more and more that it is not. There's more about CPAC. I'm not going to get into a bunch of it, but they didn't have any pro-life panels at their last national meeting because the leader, Matt Schlapp, said he didn't want them. And everything is pro-life, he said, quote unquote. But that's a bad cop-out. Like, pro-life is a very important issue. Why is it an important issue? Because pro-life agrees with reality. A baby is not my body, my choice, because it's not my body. It's a baby's body. Therefore, it's another body. And we have to help people understand the reality of reality, which should be common sense. But unfortunately, in this weird world, it's not. Now, the only other thing that I want to point out today is Meta. And I know that sounds weird and it sounds like it's not connected, but if you don't know, Facebook has recently changed its name to Meta. So Meta is now the parent company for all of the things, and it covers over all of the different areas. And the reason that we have to talk about it is it's connected. And it's connected because all of this is in service of truth. All of this is in pursuit of reality. That's how I see it. And that's also how the other side sees it. They believe that truth is subjective. I believe that truth can be known. They believe that truth is based on your perspective, your experiences, or, as we heard from Dr. Levine, whatever you believe about yourself, and you should just live that out. I believe that truth is not based on my feelings. And again, read through the Psalms, the Proverbs, Jesus, Paul, read through pretty much any part of the Bible, and you'll hear and read and know that God is truth. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. It's very clear that God is and establishes truth, and we are supposed to conform ourselves. Other places in Romans it says, don't be transformed with the world, don't be conformed to the world, but transform yourself to God by the renewing of your mind, etc. We're supposed to, as followers of God, transform ourselves into what we're created to be, that God has created for us to be. The other side of this would argue that, as we've just heard, you're supposed to transform yourself into whatever you feel like being that day, or when you were born, or last week, or based on the pizza you ate, or I don't know. I mean, really, sky's the limit. Just choose whatever you want. So here's where Meta enters into it, and I think it's interesting. Facebook and Meta now, currently, at least for a limited time, allow calling for the death of certain Russians and Putin himself. Now, that might not sound related, but I think it is. And it is because they have kicked unknown numbers of people off of their site for misinformation, disinformation, hate speech. That's a big one, right? But now they're saying certain hate speech, if you're talking about Russians, if you're talking about Putin, etc., certain hate speech is okay. And I'll read for you a couple of things. Here's the regular hate speech policy. Quote, while we understand people commonly express disdain or disagreement by threatening or calling for violence in non-serious ways, we remove that language that incites or facilitates serious violence. We remove content, disable accounts, work with law enforcement when we believe there is a genuine risk of physical harm or threats direct to public safety. We also try to consider the language and context in order to distinguish casual statements, aka jokes or whatever, continue the quote, from content that constitutes a credible threat to public or personal safety. Now, here is the temporary change. The temporary change is Facebook will allow war posts urging violence against Russian invaders, and you can allow some posts that call for death to Russian President Putin or Belarusian President Lukashenko in countries including Russia, Ukraine, Poland, and that is according to internal emails. But the posts will only be allowed if they're clearly talking about ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, and only allowed if they don't include other targets and don't include two indicators of credibility, such as the location or method. Blah, 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 whatever. Here's the point. Many people have been kicked off of these social media platforms, and I may be as well, because essentially I called a trans woman a man because that's true. And that's bad. And so I might be kicked off. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I mean, I would never do that. I would never actually say that. Right. But some people might accuse me of saying that. Because Facebook says you can't say that. That's hate. And that's terrible. But if you literally call for the death of a president of another country, right now, you've got a little window and you're okay. You can do that. This is a problem. And if you don't see this as a problem from a Christian worldview, then you haven't been paying attention. This is a really big problem, because just change Russian to Jew or African American or Christian, and you'll see how terrible this quote unquote temporary policy is. If they can say it about one thing, why wouldn't they say it about another thing? There's nothing stopping them. There's no limiting principle. There's no reason that at some point they wouldn't say anyone who quotes the Bible, you can call for their death, or at least ban them from social media experience, which we have seen in the past few years. And we've seen people kicked off for other hate speech and gender ideology and other hate speech. And we've seen them kicked off in terms of misinformation about certain virus things, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's all relative, and it's all based on whatever the technocracy says you can say or not say. And it's in service of, quote unquote, your truth, or living your truth out, or you be you, and all in pursuit of their, quote unquote, morality. And the problem that I have is, when I saw this, was some people and some conservatives may agree on some of these political points, but don't think that conservative equals Christian, because clearly sometimes it does not. And that's where we are. That's where we are as society. And I don't despair, and I don't worry. And then sometimes this may be depressing, or it may be down. It may get you down, or you may worry about this. I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to worry. I know God's got this. And I always want to end with an encouraging note, because God has got this. And really, Jesus said, don't worry if people persecute you. You're blessed. Paul said that. We hear that a lot, and we know that's the reality of the situation. We know that we will be against culture if we follow after Jesus. We've been in this weird golden hour honeymoon area where it hasn't been as bad in America, but we're moving out of that. That's just the reality of the situation. So in opposition to some of the weird definitions of courage we heard earlier, I would like to say you can have courage, and you should have courage. And courage is doing the right thing, even when other people don't like it, even when it's hard to do, even when it may cost you personally. Doing the right thing. Courage is the tipping point of all the other virtues. It's easy to love somebody when they love you. It's hard to love them, and you have to have courage to love them when they don't love you. It's easy to be patient with somebody who is easy to be patient with. It takes courage to be patient with somebody who is really hard to deal with. We all know these things. This is where courage stands up. It's when it's hard to go through life and you have to actually stand for what you believe in. Those are the places where we need courage the most. When Jesus says, take heart, that's the word for courage. Have courage, take heart. I have overcome the world. That should be a great statement for you. You should be able to hold on to that and go, well, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I just know I have to do the right thing. I hope that you do that. And I hope that you find the right thing by seeking after God and seeking after God through his scriptures and prayer and interaction with the Holy Spirit. I hope that you do that for your sake and your family's sake, because family is important and it is the building block of society. We've just made it into something that is, frankly, kind of unrecognizable. We need to get back to the definition of family that God created and has perpetuated through literally all of human time. I hope that we can do this, and I hope we can do it together in community and through churches that are local. God bless you. I hope you keep the faith through this weird and strange time, and we'll see you next time.